friends, welcome back to another journaling video. Sorry this video is going up a little bit late just because I have been sick this week, but I still wanted to share my January reading journal spreads with you, so I wanted to make sure that I got them up as soon as possible. So a couple quick things before we jump into the journal update. One, I am recording this a little bit later in the evening, so I do apologize. You might see a little bit of a shadow just because of the lighting situation. And two, this is my first time maintaining a reading journal, so just for January, I wanted to set up my spreads off camera and kind of get a feel for what layouts I wanted to use and how I wanted to go about setting up my spreads before I took a stab at recording my actual setup video. But that being said, for February, I do plan to give you a full video of me setting up every single spread for the books that will be included. So do keep an eye out for that. I'm going to try to get it up in a pretty timely fashion after February ends, and I can include all the books that I've read in the month. So for today, we're just going to do a flip through of my January reading journal spreads, and I'll give you some quick input about the books that I read and whether I enjoyed them and the things that are included in my spreads. So let's start with our start of journal pages and the updates that I have done on those. So here is the cover page of the journal, which you've already seen, and my index for the journal. So you will see that I've filled in books 1 through 16 because those are the ones that I read in January, and I did list the title, the author, the format that I read the book in, the genre, and then the page count for the books because I am interested to see my general average page count per month. Moving forward, I did color in the first 16 boxes on my reading goals spread, and I also updated that I read 16 books in January, and it is so satisfying to start to see these boxes get filled in, so I'm really excited to continue to update these as the months go by. Next, we have my various book club spreads. So I will give you an update on the books that I did get to that were in my book clubs this month. So one of the first book club books that I picked up this month was Tao Te Ching, and this was for PewDiePie's book review, and I did rate this 5 stars. We'll get into my actual review a little bit later. Now, Quicksilver was the February book for my in-person local book club, but I do want to share that I read that back in September of 2024, and I personally just didn't really enjoy this book. I didn't feel that it was particularly well written. I thought the first 10% and like the last 15% of the book were really well done and had me more intrigued to find out where the story would go. But everything in between that I just felt was really under-edited and could have used a lot of improvement. And I honestly didn't buy into our male main character liking our female main character even a little bit. So I just didn't feel that they had any chemistry, and I just wasn't sold on this, but so many people have loved this book and I really struggle to understand. So if there's a reason that you loved this and you've read it, please let me know in the comments because I would love to hear what about this was enjoyable for you. And when I did read that, I believe I gave it 2.75 stars, which was honestly probably a little generous based on how much I honestly disliked that book. So just wanted to note that I have already read that. It was technically the February book for that book club, but I did not enjoy it when I read it back in September. For my other book clubs, you already saw Nettle and Bone when I originally set up my journal because I did read that at the end of 2024 and I gave it 4.5 stars. I got to one of my 25 non-negotiables for the year because Sword of Kaigen was the January book for Crow Club, and you are getting a little spoiler here because I did already listen to the February book for Crow Club and that is updated here, but we won't be talking about that in this video. And then for Ellen Catherine's book club, we did have Spark of the Everflame. This was a really fun read for me, so I'm excited to tell you a little bit more about that. And then for Mochi Bujo, we had the Atlas 6, which I did originally listen to on audiobook at the start of 2024, if I remember that correctly. But I do really want to reread this before our book club meeting. And at the time that I'm filming this, it's already February, but we haven't had our book club meeting yet. So I am hoping to still get my reread in before that book club meeting. reading, and I am planning to read that physically this time instead of on audio, just to see if that alters how much I enjoyed the book. But I did enjoy that originally when I read it. For my series tracker, I did add the Kindred's Curse saga, that's Spark of the Everflame, because I do plan to continue with that series of books. And I did have one other update here, and that was in the Poppy War. So you will find out pretty shortly that I did finish the Poppy War trilogy in January, and I was super excited about that. Now, I did add a 25 for 2025 spread, and I wanted to show you this because this was not in my original reading journal flip through video. So I did take all 25 books that I mentioned in my 25 non-negotiables for 2025 video, and I added those here so that I could have an overview of the ones that I have gotten done. So in January, I did read Sword of Kaigen, and I don't want to give any spoilers, but in February, I have definitely gotten to a couple more of my books on this list. So you're going to have to wait and come back for my February update so you can see which books those are. So finally, we are at my January spreads, and this is my cover spread for January. So on this cover spread, I just wanted to take the opportunity to share with you that this is my reading journal, and I'm not always perfect when I go to set things up the first time. So I knew that I wanted to have a calendar spread so that I could track the actual dates that I read each book. So I took my start and finish dates for each of the books that I read this month, and I track them on here. Now, first and foremost, I did make the calendar a little bigger than I had originally wanted the calendar to be. So this is definitely a little larger than what you're probably going to see in coming months. But in addition to that, the first time that I set this spread up, I just used random colors for all of the books. And I honestly didn't feel like it was fitting the vibe that I wanted for January. So I did go back. This is sticker paper, so I was able to peel up the original calendar that I had, and I was able to replace it with a new one, and I used just 4 colors to fill this in, and I like how it turned out a lot better than how it originally looked. I did want to give a few shout outs to the statistics that I did have available to me from Storygraph this month. So all of this data is taken from Storygraph, and I just included the number of books read, the total pages read, the format, whether print or digital, or audio, and then the genre, whether they were fiction or nonfiction. So I just like to have that to reference. And then I used some of my letter stamps to make a cute little header for the month. And I did find some art on Pinterest, so I do apologize. I don't know the original artist for this piece, but I really loved this and I thought it fit with the vibe that I wanted for January. So I printed that off on sticker paper and included it here as well. I am hoping to do a little bit of hand-drawn art in the future, so hopefully I will have more time in the coming months and I can move away from using printables and do a little more art, but you'll just have to stay tuned to see. So after this page, I wanted to set up a spread that showed the books that were on my TBR versus the books that I actually read. So I pulled 9 books that were on my TBR for January using a random number generator, and these are those 9, and then these are all 16 books that I read for the month. And I really like this comparison because I think it helps to show which books I got to from my TBR, which ones I didn't, and then what the other books were that I was essentially mood reading for the rest of the month. I also just threw in another graph here from Storygraph because I update my Storygraph daily, so this gives an idea of how many pages I read per day in January. Now this does have a slight discrepancy because I read every day of the month, but on the 18th it shows that I did not read any pages. So I think this was an error where I tried to log the pages on the 19th that I had read on the 18th, and my Storygraph just didn't quite update correctly. But I did read every day for the month. But I really like having this graph. I think it's really cool to see where I did the most of my reading. So moving into our first review spread, I do want to mention don't look at the page yet. If you don't want any spoilers, do not read anything that I've written in my reviews, because I'm not going to state any spoilers in these videos, but I can't promise that what I've written will not have any spoilers. So if you want it to be 100% spoiler free, just make sure you're not reading the reviews. So the first book that I finished in January was The Dragon Republic by R.F. Kuang, and I did listen to this on audiobook. I have the full trilogy on audio, and so I wanted to set up my spread including both The Dragon Republic and The Burning God because I did finish both of these books this month. It does take me a little bit longer to get through audiobooks than it does physical books because I tend to only listen to them when I'm driving or doing chores. So you'll see that I actually started The Dragon Republic December 1st and didn't finish it for over a month, so I didn't finish that until January. And then The Burning God I read between January 5th and January 12th. So I wanted to put these on the same spread together, and again I just looked for some pictures that were either fan art or met the aesthetic of the Poppy War trilogy and include those here. As you might know, one of the gods that is heavily featured in this trilogy is the Phoenix, so I wanted to make sure that I featured the Phoenix here, as well as our main character Ren and some of the other characters and quotes from these two books. So overall, I really enjoyed these. None of them got a 5-star for me until the final book, and the final book did get 5 stars, but I would say that as a whole, this trilogy is a 5-star trilogy for me. So I really loved these. This was the second piece of R.F. Kuang's writing that I really got into. I read Yellowface first, and I thought it was a really brilliant piece of work, and I really enjoyed The Poppy War. It's hard to say enjoyed about a book that deals with so much war and so many gruesome topics, but overall I thought this was really beautifully and masterfully done, and I would highly recommend reading the Poppy War trilogy if you have the opportunity to do so. Up next, I did a spread containing 4 different books that I read this month, and I do really like how this layout worked because I feel that it really feels very full with fewer pictures on the page. Now, that being said, this doesn't mean that these books were any less important to me or that I enjoyed them any less. As you'll see, I've got 3 5-star reads right here on this page. So I really did like this layout, and I did find myself wanting a little more space to write on some of these, but overall, I really enjoyed setting up this spread. So up top, I've got I Cheerfully Refuse, which is literary fiction, and I believe I mentioned this in my January wrap up, but I just want to mention it again that I had this on my physical TBR, but I did not bump it to the top of my physical TBR until I had watched Plant-Based Bride's top sci-fi books reading vlog, and she absolutely loved this book, and based on her feedback I just knew that I needed to move it to the top of my physical TBR, so I did. I absolutely loved it. It made me cry, it made me angry. I thought it was a beautiful book, and at some points it did feel a little too close to today's reality, so I really appreciated this work, and I highly recommend reading it. I absolutely loved it, and I think I will probably revisit it soon when I have an opportunity. Next, I have Tao Te Ching, which I mentioned was the PewDiePie book club pick for January. This was one of the first books that I read this month, and I honestly really loved all of the lessons that were featured in this book. They really resonated with me, especially after working towards and earning my 200-hour yoga certification. I felt that a lot of the principles and ideals that were featured in this book really mirrored a lot of what I learned through that yoga teacher training, and this is really a way of life that I'm trying to adopt, and a mindset towards life and towards objects that I'm trying to adopt, so I really appreciated this. I think it's very hard to rate a nonfiction book that is in this style, especially because it deals with religion and ideology, but for me, I will say this was a 5-star reading experience because I got my yoga certification back in September of 2024, and I really liked that this brought a lot of those same ideas to the front of my mind starting 2025 so that I can enter the year with this at the top of my mind and kind of move forward through the next 12 months thinking of these principles and finding more ways to continue to study them and learn new perspectives. So I really enjoyed that. Now, I did read James for my reading my highest and lowest rated books on my physical TBR video. So if you want to hear all of my thoughts about this book, I would recommend that you go watch that video. I don't want to spend too much time talking about it here because it does have a vlog dedicated solely to it, but it was a 5-star read for me. I loved this book. I honestly think it outshines Huckleberry Finn, and I hope that in schools, if they're still teaching Huckleberry Finn, that they will include this book right alongside it. So I really think this was a wonderful book, and you should read it whether you've read the original piece or not. I think this is really a worthwhile book to read. And the next book that I have is The Wager by David Grann. Now, I did have to listen to this on audio because I just wasn't feeling motivated to pick it up and read it. This is a nonfiction book that details the shipwreck and mutiny surrounding a ship called The Wager, and I personally just didn't really enjoy the delivery for this book. I thought it made some good points towards the end of the book that were good for consideration, but I overall just didn't find it that enthralling, or I didn't feel that I was really hooked into listening to the story. And I'm not looking for the author to over sensationalize true facts and things that did happen, but I just felt like some of what we focused on didn't resonate with me as much. So I liked the concept, but I just really wasn't feeling it, and I do think that might have impacted my overall reading experience for that book. And I did rate it 3.5 stars. So up next, I've got a little bit of a 2-pager, and you might notice that something is missing here. I don't know what happened. I swear I printed the Sword of Kaigen to go here, the book cover, but it wasn't in with my clippings, so I need to print that out and get that updated, but just pretend that the book cover is there for me. So on the left side, I've got Dragonfall and Emberclaw. I also picked up Dragonfall during that highest and lowest rated books on my physical TBR video. So again, if you want to hear my full thoughts, I will reference that. I did really enjoy this book, and I gave it 4 stars, which is higher than the Goodreads rating. So I would recommend that you go and hear all of my thoughts related to that. But as soon as I finished Dragonfall, I did apply to receive an arc of Emberclaw, which is the sequel that will be coming out this year, and I was approved, thankfully. So I immediately read that, and I really enjoyed Emberclaw. I liked where the story took our characters and the setting and how everything developed. So I would highly recommend reading both of these. I thought they were really great books, and I loved all of the aspects that L.R. Lamb chose to incorporate in her books. I thought they were very well done, and I appreciated the world that she created. And then over on the right, we've got The Sword of Kaigen, and I don't have my little star rating sticker because I don't have the book cover, but I did rate this 5 stars. And I absolutely loved this book. I thought it was so good. I'm honestly extremely disappointed that Emma Wong is not going to continue this series because the book does end off in a way that sets it up to have additional books to follow up after. But I thought the magic system, the characters, the depth of the characters, the relationships, whether romantic or platonic or familial, were all really amazing. And I can't say enough positive things about this book, so please go and read it. I've already picked up another one of Emma Wong's books, and I can't wait to get into it. So Sword of Kaigen was a very easy 5-star book for me. We've got another 2-pager. So on the left, we've got Magnolia Parks, and on the right, we've got Playground by Richard Powers. And I absolutely loved Magnolia Parks. I know this is like toxic and kind of trashy in the way that the characters treat each other, and it's definitely like watching a train wreck, but you just can't look away. And I absolutely love that this was giving me like trashy reality TV, but with super rich kids. And the way that Jessa Hastings described various things, various feelings throughout this book were honestly so good. And I don't know what it was about this toxic book, but I just absolutely loved it. I'm really excited to continue with this series. I'm very intrigued by Daisy Hates from what we saw of her in this book, so I can't wait to get into her story in the second book. And I already have books 3 and 4 held on Libby, so I will definitely be reading this full series. And over on the right, we've got Playground by Richard Powers, and I just kept seeing this book over and over while I was traveling, and I finally just decided I've got to have it. The synopsis sounds really good to me, so I got the audiobook, and I really thoroughly enjoyed it. Initially, I was super hooked by all the descriptions of sea life and diving in the ocean because that just really resonates with me, but this book was so much more than that in terms of the speculation that it brought to the table, the relationships that it depicted, as well as some concepts related to AI. So I have learned a couple things since finishing the audiobook about the physical book that make me very excited to do a reread of this with a physical copy, and I do already have a physical copy. So I definitely think I rated this 4.5 stars for the audio, but when I read the physical book, I think I may update this to a 5-star read based on that experience. So I can't wait to get back into this book, and I thought it was so good. I had never read anything by Richard Powers, and I'm definitely wanting to look into more of his work moving forward. So we have another 4-page spread. This one does have fewer decorations, fewer pictures. That's not because I didn't like this set of books as much. I just hadn't saved any for these books in particular, so I just decided to stick to my reviews and writing out my thoughts. So I've got Elsewhere by Gabrielle Zevin. This is a young adult book, and I have read 2 other books by Gabrielle Zevin. Unfortunately for me, with some of the depictions and things that were included in this book, it did only get a 3-star for me, but I do think it made some really good commentary on all lives being worth living, no matter how long or short they are, or whether you're living them forwards or backwards, which won't make sense unless you read the book, so maybe you'll want to pick it up based on that. And also that love is worthwhile, no matter how long you will have the opportunity to love someone, and no matter what age you are. So I think there were some really great concepts in here that were very sweet, but just some of the content did not sit well with me. I think it was definitely a wrong time situation, so that only got 3 stars from me. Then I have Spark of the Everflame, which I mentioned was my Ellen Catherine book club pick, and I actually read this in about 3 days, but I finished it with 10 minutes to spare before the book club meeting, so thank goodness this is a fast-paced book and I was hooked on it because I needed to hustle to get this done. But I was so glad that I finished it in time. I really enjoyed being in the book club live stream, and I honestly really enjoyed this book. I haven't been super hooked into a romantasy book in a long time, and I felt like this one honestly interested me quite a bit, and I definitely want to continue the series. I don't know where it's gonna go from here, but there's a lot that was left unanswered at the end of the book that I'm dying to find out, so I am really excited to continue this book. Next we have Solido by Javier Zamora, which I listened to this as an audiobook. Anytime I have an opportunity to listen to a memoir being told by the author themselves, I'm always gonna take that chance because I definitely prefer to hear it told in their own words and their own voice. So that is how I chose to listen to this, and I really appreciated that Javier was willing to share his story in this way and to be vulnerable about everything he experienced while making the transition to immigrate into the United States and the arduous journey that he had to go on to do so, to be reunited with his parents. This honestly was heartbreaking and beautiful, and to see it through a child's eyes, I just really appreciated that. But I also appreciated just in general everything that he chose to include and to be vulnerable about and to be genuine about, and I really appreciated this glimpse into his mind and his life, and I'm just so thankful that he wrote this book and chose to share it, and that was a 5-star read for me. And lastly on this page we have Wrong Place, Wrong Time, which I thought had a really great concept as a thriller, but the pacing just wasn't quite there. There were many times where I felt like I should be on the edge of my seat for this book, and I'm just not hooked. I'm just not drawn in. So unfortunately, I thought it had a really good concept and a really good idea behind it, but it just didn't quite hit for me, and I felt like I drew conclusions about everything that were correct long before the main character drew those conclusions and resolved her issues. So that was frustrating for me, but I do think I will give this author a second try because I really liked the concept here and I thought it was very novel. So that got 3.5 stars for me. And then to finish up my month, I got Anatomy in on January 31st. I started and finished it on the last day of the month, and I am so glad that I did. This is a young adult book that is kind of a historical romance, and I absolutely adored this. I loved our main female character, her attitude, the way she questioned societal standards, the way she stood up for herself, and the way she really just took things into her own hands were really amazing, and I just loved how fearless she was from start to finish. She was putting herself in places where women were not welcome, but she knew what she was doing and she wasn't afraid to stand up for herself. And I really, really loved that. In addition to that, I thought the romance that we watched grow through this book was so, so sweet. And there is a second book that I think continues to revolve around that romance, as well as our main character Hazel's journey as a surgeon or physician. So I do already own a copy of book 2, and I am really excited to get back into this story and to see where it takes her and her love interest. So I'm very excited to continue that, but that does conclude all of the books that I read for January. So just to flip back to my cover page for some final thoughts. Overall, I thought this was a really phenomenal reading month and I got through so many books. I think in my mind, I really wanted to get to 20 books and I obviously did not do that, but I did have travel planned this month and I was very busy. So I'm not going to beat myself up because it's not about the quantity of books that I read, but it is about the quality, and I am more than on track to reach my goal of 150 books this year based on the 16 books that I read this month. I am also really proud of myself for the nonfiction books that I read this month. I'm not typically someone who jumps into nonfiction, and I have been enjoying memoirs and nonfiction books a lot more. So I'm really excited to continue to explore that and see whose stories I can learn about and how I can broaden my horizons in that way in the coming months. And I also am really proud of myself for reading more digital and audiobooks this month. I had never listened to an audiobook until the beginning of 2024, and the Atlas 6 was actually the first audiobook that I ever picked up. And before that, my mind was really just not open to audiobooks being a valid form of reading or engaging in content, which I know personally is an extremely ableist mindset to have, which I now am fully in support of audiobooks being a form of reading. And I know that I have actually gotten more from certain books by choosing to listen to them as audiobooks as opposed to reading them as physical or digital copies. So I'm honestly really proud of myself for kind of letting go of that stigma and incorporating more audiobooks into my listening habits and my reading habits, because it really has broadened my horizons. So I hope to continue to do that. And I am glad that I'm reading more digital books because I think it's helping to prevent me from going out and purchasing more books and going shopping, which is really important to me this year as I try to take down a lot of my physical TBR and stop adding to my book collection unless I have read the book and really love it. So just wanted to give some of those final thoughts, but overall January was a really great reading month for me. I would love to hear how January was for you, maybe how many books you read or what your favorite book was for January. Please feel free to leave that down in the comments. But with that being said, that is all I have for you today. So I really hope you enjoyed getting to see all of my January reading journal spreads, and I do hope that in the next month you will actually get to see me setting up my February spreads. That is my plan. So I can't wait to share that with you. But thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye!